Unicole Unicron Friends unite. Business frequency, aliens in sight. Turn up the volume and settle in. Your mind will be blown. Let's begin.
Welcome everyone to Unicole Unicron and Friends. Today we have a wonderful, amazing guest. I am so excited to have her on. It is Francina Simone. She is an alchemist of the mind, a celebrated author, data scientist, and a visionary founder of the Midnight Scholar Society. You actually it's a very difficult thing to try to describe the Midnight Scholar Society, Francina. She is so just so expansive on so many different topics, and I'm just really excited to see where our conversation goes. She has a very popular Substack, moving to Patreon, I believe, right now, and a podcast, I believe. Do you have a podcast?
I can go ahead and tell you, because it's
Yeah.
The Midnight Scholar Society is an occult society. The funniest thing is that it's as secretive as it seems from the outside. It's actually the most practical thing behind closed doors. So I teach media literacy, astrology, and creative thinking, and how all that bundled together creates alchemy. So we discuss a lot of things like story, how energy moves, what is energy. There's a lot of STEAM going on back here, the A in arts and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, So we do it's a STEAM. It's a whole engine. At what people think is magic is really just the world yet explained, or, to the particular person who thinks it's magical. So it's that's what's going on behind the scenes over there. But I do a newsletter. And the newsletter is oftentimes delivered through audio. And so it's, that's the podcast. So, yeah.
It's so funny. I saw your TikTok about fairy tales, which I'm excited to talk about. And I got so excited because there are not that many people who look at fairy tales through the archetypal lens. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh. And then I was watching your other content, I followed you, and every single video just was blowing my mind, and it felt so aligned. And then I even went into, after we had emailed for this podcast, I went in and I searched your email, and I realized I have already bought the spiritual business content from you. So it's just amazing how much you do. It's like, from a burnout perspective, I know how much I do. And it's like looking at how many different places you have your energy and your mind even expanded to. Like, how do you hold it all? How do you manage it? How do you follow everything and keep it structured the way that you do?
Oh, so this is my favorite question. Actually, the fact that you asked me that so completely without knowing what's going on, behind the scenes, no one knows what I've just was working on. But the next class that we're doing in course is sustaining success. So it's really on brand. So essentially, and this is what I always like to tell people is, so from the outside in, it looks like I do a lot. I'm everywhere. In all actuality, what you're just seeing is my total and genuine self-expression. I don't repress myself. I direct energy into a way that's appropriate, not just for me, but the people around me. That's why I talk about integrity all the time. Because when you just take your energy and you put it towards your joy, and your joy is always, remember, when you feel ultimate joy, that means you feel good and the people around you feel good. We don't feel joy when other people are suffering. It's not possible. Joy and suffering cannot be in the same room. Those two, it's like sadness isn't suffering. You know what I mean? If you think about the Inside Out movie, sadness isn't suffering. Suffering is a whole slew of other emotions. And joy can barely stand in Inside Out to be around sadness. The first movie, she's really having to overcome herself to learn how to let sadness in. So suffering is something where joy literally draws the line there. Which means to be in joy and to bring joy into a place where suffering once was, and all of that kind of stuff. It requires integrity. It requires emotional regulation. It requires going with the flow. And also it 1,000% requires you being your most authentic self. Because when you know yourself, you know how to arrive in any situation and how to calibrate for what's going on around you. If your joy is not in the situation, perhaps you are not best served there. Meaning, no matter what it is that you want to do there, you might not be the right person. And you leaving may inspire the right person to arrive. And so sometimes we are literally when you're suffering, you can't help anyone, that sort of concept, or when you're in survival mode, you are needing rescuing. You, you are not one ready to rescue another. You know what I mean? The person who is doing the saving is somebody who has more security in one way, shape, or form. And as a community of like adults, right, we all have some form of security that we can be that person, but we're also disempowered sometimes by the systems we live in. I mean, we were just talking a little earlier about how we're kind of on the fringe of society. You know what I mean? The stuff that we talk about and how we discuss these things and all of that. So sometimes we're in situations and spaces and places where we have some security to offer that somebody doesn't have. And that doesn't mean we're not suffering in other spaces and places. Maybe that person has a place of security to offer you that alleviates your suffering. So it's like allowing the flow of nature. Honestly, it's what the Tao is always talking about, the flow. We're not meant to not be ourselves. We're meant to express ourselves fully and authentically. To everyone else, it looks like I'm doing stuff all over the place. Even down to my family members would think that I was scatterbrained because they could not see the orchestration of me. But that's not for them to see. That's for me to observe and witness and fall in love with. All of the things that I love,
Yeah, you are
So
speaking my language. The one thing though that I wonder about is like, so is it just your authentic joy to have so much structure too? Because you are a very structured person as well. Like you have these places where repositories where your thoughts do go, and you've built the audience, you've maintained the regularity of posting and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. So we talked about this earlier where I was like, I never tell people my sun, moon, and rising sign unless it's like directly related to like something I'm teaching. Then I like kind of let it squeeze out a little bit to like explain something. But like I have a lot of Capricorn energy.
Me too.
So naturally, yeah, I'm led by Saturn. You know what I mean? I love structure. I'm devoted to structure. I am not disciplined at all. Discipline is something that develops. Discipline is what creates. I should say this. Discipline is your habit, but what forms the habit is devotion. And so that's the lesson of Saturn. So I love structure. Like this is one of the areas in life where I have to like really keep an eye on myself when it comes to like parenting. Because I'll walk into my kid's room and I'll be like, this is so unorganized. Let me teach you the art of joy. Marie Kondo.
Totally.
Joy. Everything deserves a home. Everything needs a home. What is this doing on the floor? You know what I mean? Like I will walk into the room and my nervous system goes like on the fritz. And that's when I know I have to walk out because I am not the person who can help bring order here. And like my partner will go in and he's fine. And like all of a sudden, like he'll just say one thing and the kids are like, yeah, that makes sense. And then they're just doing it on their own. I'm like, yeah, I was not the person meant to deliver that message because their room sends me into survival mode. Like I need structure and
Family
order.
dynamics.
And then
Yeah, family dynamics are so funny. My kid is 2 and he's a Virgo and I'm a Leo, and he's cleaning the house more than I am at this point. He loves to clean. He'll get a sponge and he'll just go to town for like 20 minutes straight. And I'm like, okay, we're keeping the house really clean.
Oh, absolutely. They also
Love
tend
it.
to be minimalist too. So like, if he just chucks all his toys one day and wants nothing to do with them, my son, he's also a Virgo.
They love that.
I'm always like, keep things. He's like, nah, I'm not interested.
That's great. I love that. Man,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's so exciting, and maybe we should just dive into the fairy tales because I feel like we've been waiting like a month to talk about it, and it's so interesting and it's so exciting. So my perception of it is, fairy tales are these stories, and I've studied fairy tales from all over the world, and you would not believe the amount of differences in the way that even storytelling is. Like the Russian fairy tales and Indonesian fairy tales, you don't even recognize them almost as a story in the sense that we would understand a story sometimes. And we're so programmed with this idea of morality being taught through storytelling that it's so hard to even think that a story would be taught or told from another perspective. So when I started studying fairy tales, I was just totally blown away by the cultural differences. And also, when I was in my undergrad, I pulled a piece of paper out of the trash. It was someone's thesis on the first jokes ever recorded. And like one of the jokes that was recorded didn't make any sense at all. And the other joke was like about a penis. It was just like the most basic, like human body humor. But like just this idea of like how storytelling jokes have gotten developed and what it says about our psyche and how we're looking at storytelling right now with AI or with social media. So what are your thoughts on all that?
Okay, so one, I love the conversation because if there's one thing everybody knows about me is I'm always screaming media literacy, literacy, because that's like what I teach mainly. But when I say so storytelling, I want to go back to the first idea where you said, people have been conditioned to understand story through one lens, right? And that's through moral storytelling. This is like some type of allegory that teaches you something specific. Like technically, all stories are blueprint of the soul. So that's like fairy tales. They are blueprints of the of the soul meant to instruct you. But when in Western society, the instruction comes through morality, whereas in other cultures, sometimes the structure or the lesson isn't about morality. It's about how to navigate a specific game, a game between two people. The game could be love. How are they going to navigate love? How are they going to navigate falling in love? How do you navigate someone who is predatorial and you want true love and there are 1,000 suitors who don't? They want something else. That's a game. The moment you introduce something not genuine into the equation, it becomes a game. Otherwise, it's just nature taking its course. And so in a lot of cultures, there's a lot of different ways of how do you navigate energy, essentially emotionally regulating yourself when your nervous system goes awry because you're introduced into something new, something challenging or something strange, regardless of whatever it is. It could be something as simple as falling in love or something as magnificent as an enemy has come before us. And we're not totally sure if this is an enemy or if we are the enemy about to self-sabotage a relationship, relationship building, trade, all of that kind of stuff. And I find that the huge key is culture. We can't understand anyone's stories. That's what I love about fairy tales is they're like a step in because we all have fairy tales, we all have myth, we all have story. That's our first step into learning a different culture, to learn what it is that these people, how they see the world, how they stack it up, how they organize it, and how they, pass down all of the language of how to navigate whatever it is they happen to be navigating at that time. And so, like, as much as they're all different, all stories are the same. They're all about energy. But you're right. These archetypes that show up, maybe a hero in one culture is a villain in another. And we haven't taken into account culturally that this hero is actually is somebody born from the darkness. Everything they do looks good in comparison to whatever's going on over here. Whereas if you insert that same archetype into a different culture, that person's, unwell, that person's a schemer, that person is too obsessed with power all of a sudden, And so I think this is probably one of my biggest happy spaces because you can never get bored here. I can never get bored learning about how other people have experienced and seen the world, because that's kind of what brings us all together as one.
I love the way you described that. And it kind of got me thinking about on TikTok when a video gets put on the wrong audience's For You page. And it's like the comments are all the opposite of what you would think they would be, because that hero in their timeline gets on the wrong For You pages and ends up being a villain or vice versa.
Yeah, that one's always a wild ride.
It really is. What do you think about the algorithm?
I think, well, I'll say this because technology is in such an interesting space right now. I love the algorithm personally because I use it like a little magical ball. To me, it's a little dark crystal. Sometimes I have a question. I'm like, yeah, I just throw it up to the universe. And I open up, I'll close out TikTok, reopen it and see. And the first video usually has a message. It's come down to a point, like my husband, he's very much, we're very much opposites. So his way of interacting with the world is different than mine, but also we're on the same page about a lot of things. So I knew that was real when he was starting to test it and it was working for him.
It's
I was
so
like, oh,
real. Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah. So for me, it's I use it almost like it's Mercury. Like, everything technology in my mind is mercurial. So I use it as like Mercury's sending me a message and I'm picking up on something. So now I got to decode it. And sometimes I'll use TikTok for that. Sometimes it's draining. You know what I mean? It can be emotionally dysregulating because you're getting messages from all sorts of collective energies. And then sometimes it's limiting because it keeps people trapped in the idea that what they're seeing and how varied what they're seeing is the wild variance of the world. And it's not. It's just one timeline and a few people who are eclectic on that timeline. You know what I mean? But there's like a million other timelines, so it can be limiting and it can also be very freeing. And I think it's all based on like people's like ability to handle and navigate themselves digitally is what you're going to get out of it. But I love the algorithm and also am very like non-reliant on it. Like that's one of my huge things is I don't rely on it at all. I see it for what it is. It's a little dark crystal, but the magic doesn't come from that. It's already around you. You don't even need that. You just go outside and talk to a squirrel and get the same exact thing.
Totally. I love squirrels. That's amazing. So
Yeah.
as far as like, AI psychosis has been big, and like recently there was like that girl who fell in love with her psychiatrist, and she used ChatGPT to like validate. How do you feel like, I guess the first question is, can you just give us like a quick rundown on what you mean by media literacy and like your number one info about that? And then also like, how would you apply that to using large language models?
Ooh, okay. So Kendra, who fell in love with her psychiatrist, honestly, AI is what I find most interesting about AI is that it is showing everyone their cesspools. Academia is like none of the kids are reading, and it's like when were they? Stanford literally changed the way you teach kids to read to the point where you knew that they didn't learn to read; they were just sight reading. So why would they read now all of a sudden? Why is AI all of a sudden the culprit to them being illiterate? And then Kendra, I mean, like when we talk about cultures, right? And we talk about like all of the deep issues in society, Kendra's kind of like a woman who has a lot of privilege. She's a white woman. She has blonde hair. She has blue eyes. She, if you just look at her background, looks like she, is very comfortable. She may not be the most comfortable, but she's definitely comfortable enough to feel secure and safe in a system that doesn't really impact her too much, right? So it's going to take her probably more than one book to decolonize. It's probably going to take her quite a few experiences, not just giving her power based off of a system that pressures them by saying, we'll give you this in exchange for giving over all your personal power in this situation, right? Like she's not experiencing the downside of that a lot, so she has no awareness of it. And all AI did was point out all of the ways in which she hides all of her bad behaviors. This stuff that she knows is probably wrong, but does anyways. And I mean, I just saw like 2 videos of her, and I was like, she's already admitted to like committing 3 or 4 social crimes. You know what I mean? Pushing people's boundaries on purpose to see them uncomfortable. She found that to be flirting. And yeah, in some situations, people find it that way, but they also tend to be in abusive dating circles where that sort of a thing happens. And instead of like, acknowledge, she knew that wasn't right, but she did it anyways. And then she says that she's not in the wrong here. You know what I mean? Like there's a whole slew of issues. It's probably going to take her more than a few books to
Maybe a
fix
lifetime or
that.
two. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's just so hard to sit in that realization of the privilege and the role that is having in the dynamic.
For sure. But see, this is where media literacy comes into place. It's really hard to read stuff, realize you're an idiot, and apply things. Like, this is what we all deal with education. Like, education is not fun. Like, it can be. We can make it fun. We can find intrinsic reasons of why we're there. But essentially, education is building emotional resilience. Anytime you're learning anything logic based, like mathematics and stuff, you are drilling your brain to build new neural pathways. That is not fun. I hate teaching math because it tires children out. Like they're working there. You have to help them build like 5 different components of information gathering. There's so much going on that just feels bad in education that you have to intrinsically want to learn something to overcome it. And this is just emotional resilience. So like media literacy teaches emotional resilience without people having to be punished for not having it. And so that's why I'm like media literacy, stories. That's why culturally we tell stories. It is to give you the awareness of something. So that way, when it happens, you can kind of know how to move around it without starting from ground zero or getting hit in the back of the head with a realization. Because, oh my God, how did I end up in this space? I didn't even know. That's betrayal, right? I didn't even know what was going on. And now all of a sudden, the veil has been lifted over my eyes and I found out that I'm guilty of these things, but how can I be guilty if I didn't even know that I was doing it? See, that's like being thrown into the pool and no one taught you how to swim. You're just thrown in there and they're like, you'll figure it out. That's crazy. We have media literacy to like teach people how to swim before we throw them out into that pool. And I mean that like metaphorically and literally because, emotions, emotional resilience, all that's water stuff. So like it really is, to me, it literally just boils down to that.
I love that. So as far as like the way that ChatGPT, at least 4.0, acts is to really affirm the user's belief and like create that sort of belief bubble. How do you feel that is impacting individuals psychologically?
Oh, okay. So I will answer that in two parts by answering the last question from previously about how LLMs, how does all this relate to LLMs, and then answer this one. So how all that relates to LLMs essentially is that like the LLM needs someone who has media literacy to talk to it. LLMs are large language models. Essentially, it's just a bunch of information. So it has all of the possible information you can think about. And if you organize a specific sentence in a certain way, it can organize all that specific information and give you just what you need. And the AI is supposed to just be really good at parsing information and delivering an answer, right? The AI is being treated the same way autistic children are treated in like math classes or in literature classes. Oh, because they're dissociated or because they're struggling, there's something wrong with them. When in all actuality, what's one thing that in neurodivergence people are always asking for? And it's the same thing the AI needs: context. Context. You have to give it context to get an answer. Otherwise, it's just going to come up with whatever possibilities sound right at the time. And with the AI, it's a black box. Whatever possibilities sound right at the time for it are like literally based on absolutely nothing besides whatever it comes up to base it on. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the least amount of context, and how do we learn how to give context? Literacy. When a story is literally giving you words stacked up in an organized way that start at the beginning, a middle, and end, and are organized in a very specific way that you understand what it's communicating and you understand all of the cool different things it's communicating. I mean, hell, talking about like, one of the Star Wars was a huge one. Harry Potter is a huge one, but Harry Potter, because it was a book, right? All of these people are living at Hogwarts and before it was even constructed in the physical world in any way, shape, or form, because they had context of how to build it. They were experiencing it. They were interacting with it in 1,000 different ways because they read and understood what they were reading. They were engaged with it enough to exchange and have all that information imparted upon them. So they were able to then build it imaginatively and connect across the world globally about this thing. That's context. That's context. But you also have to be able to like communicate and know what's necessary in communication to be able to communicate appropriately to somebody. And that's context. So, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. So the idea of emotional literacy for you is the idea of emotional resilience to absorb alternative viewpoints, to build the scaffolding of context, to have a larger worldview. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's it. That's the steps from to awareness into consciousness, essentially. And I mean, like, that's not something I want to be very clear to everybody listening. That is not something that I am this brilliant genius who came up with. This is just what people have been saying in books for a very long time, and I just so happen to read them. That's why I'm always
telling it through in a certain way that's very valuable and like also very unique. You can read 10 books and then they're all saying different pieces of something, but I think you're creating like a contextual delivery that's very valuable. So thank you.
For sure. I do. I recognize myself in the equation as a mouthpiece of something very specific, and I am very specifically suited to deliver it. But I do like to say that because over and over, I wouldn't be me if I didn't scream, read, read. Every
I have read books tattooed on my arm. So I think reading is wonderful. I grew up reading, and I grew up reading in the sense that I was escaping, trauma. I was definitely using it as an escape, but boy, are there benefits to having done so.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
even
grateful
at
for
the
that.
base level of using it to escape provides you like a keys to a kingdom that like liberates you beyond all imagination. That's what's so beautiful about it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just get insight into other people's like patterns of thought. Like it's so interesting to me how you can start a book and it'll be hard to read at first because you have to sort of enter the mind of
Mhm.
of the person who authored it until you get to the point where it becomes like you're carrying their voice inside your mind.
Oh, no, 100%. That is 100% what's happening. You are entering the psyche of the author. That's why I always say, know the author, understand the culture that they were in, like their hierarchy dynamics in their culture. Understand all those things because you are 100% in their psyche. And they're saying oftentimes, trust me. And some of them will say, no, you're not. I'm not real. Don't even pay attention to me.
Right, but it matters because whoever they were, it's where the book came from, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It does matter. Why do you think we ended up in such a deep hierarchy?
Oh, I think, that's a really difficult question that requires a lot of nuance, but I'm going to still say this anyways. I think that it is it's like humans have a necessary to organize and be organized because we are information processing like units, like our bodies organize information to help us do what we need to do, right? But like hierarchies do exist as a role that you perform. The problem is when people confuse personal and work, like the role that I perform and the human that I am. When there's a cognitive disconnect there because there aren't boundaries and all that. In other words, I think we end up this way because people are trying to simplify life. Like, I'm trying to even answer the question, and I started out saying, "It's a really complex nuance," and then I tried to boil it down, and I couldn't. And that's because the problem is we try to, like, simplify these things, and we try to do it. We can't take everyone into account when we simplify, and then taking everyone into account means we can't simplify, which then makes us upset because we want to organize and simplify, and instead of, like, it's the lack of ability to deal with, lack of control. Like, I don't try to control anything. I don't try to simplify stuff. I don't try to do I'm just here to do what I'm here to do. And because I know myself, I know what that is. That's actually simplifying, right? But also at the same time, I cannot be in control of the whole thing going on if I can only hold the capacity of what I'm here to do. And
That's
so that requires surrendering. That's where we get universe, soul, spirit, soul, energy. Astrology is I tell people this all the time. The energies does everything for you. All you had to do is just kind of sit and pay attention. I mean, like the monks, they really knew that. Like, if I was okay living in stone, or living in like communes and stuff like that, I totally would be a monk. They're right. You know what I mean? It really doesn't take much to like be where you need to be at the right time and all of that. It just happens. It just
I love
happens. Children, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I know, I just love the way you describe that because, like, I'm always, like, walking around, like, angry, like, "Why are we in a hierarchy? Like, this is so dumb. Like, it's so dumb. Like, can't you see everyone has equal power? Everyone has, like, equal, like, beauty that they're bringing to this reality." And the way you described it gave me a lot more empathy because it's actually hard if you don't have that expanded awareness of holding like the villain as the hero and all of the different ways that nuance happens in reality, like it can overwhelm you, exhaust you, kill your ego in the sense that you don't know who you are anymore. It's throwing you into the deep end, just like you were saying. And if you haven't had experience holding that open context, a hierarchy makes so much more sense. It's so much simpler. It's so much more straightforward. Here's who I listen to. Here's who I make fun of. Like it's all written out for you. You don't have to worry about making those decisions about people every minute of every day based on genuine energy that's flowing.
Yeah, it's real safe. I use this analogy all the time. And there are many adults who have never left the playground. They don't feel safe in the real world. So they have to put on, they're like those kids in trench coats. There's three kids in a trench coat.
Oh
That's
yeah.
them. They're walking around in like C-suites doing that. They're walking around everywhere, everywhere, up and down. I mean, I just was talking about a bunch of PhDs who don't read. Those are people walking around. They're still on the playground legitimately because they are terrified of actual life. So they just watch other people, they perform what other people are doing, and then they use that as a means. I'll say this, if we're all actors on a stage, we should at least know our part, right? We should at least know the script that we're here to deliver. But they won't listen to that. They won't pay attention to the script that they're there to deliver. They will watch other actors perform the part and then just try to do that. And because of media literacy, some people will confuse plays. They'll say that this Shakespeare play is the same thing as, I don't know, this Oscar Wilde play. And they'll just mix and match. And that's how they're going to show up on stage. They don't read the script. They don't know who their actor is. They don't know anything. They're just going to put on a performance. And a lot of people get away with doing stuff like that because if enough people do it and there's chaos everywhere and nothing makes sense, then the person who does know what they're doing is the enemy.
Oh my goodness.
It's wild. Yeah.
It's so true. And it's actually quite sad, to really think about it that way, because the life that's lived from that sort of box or, safe little box is just so limited, and you really don't have that ability to speak in radical truth and freedom and cognitive liberty of who you really are, and like you said, what you're here to do.
I will say this. I do tell people I practice grace more so than I do empathy in situations like that. Only because children are also at those playgrounds and these adults are acting as adults, but in the playground with children. And so it creates a community and space where children aren't safe. And that's why America is in the state that it's in, because there were a lot of adults who want to just play on the playground and pretend like they're kids half the time, except for when it matters, like to get money or whatever it is that they need. And that puts children at risk. So for me, that's a hard line. I don't extend empathy in those situations, but I do extend grace. And grace looks 1,000. It's, it depends on what's appropriate in the moment. You know what I'm saying? It's not like I'm sitting here like, coming down on the hammer with people or anything like that. It's really contextual. But grace is boundaries, what I give my attention to and what I don't. So that could be in a conversation where someone's kind of playing into a hierarchy because they all of a sudden feel insecure. I'm going to give them a bit of my absence, because if they're not willing to work on that themselves the same way I have to when it happens, then I don't need to be in community there. Like, I don't need to share space with someone who's not going to work on it, because not working on it means that they are actively pretending to be a safe person in rooms where people will trust them to be safe. And sometimes, and in some way, shape, or form, because there's someone who stays on the playground, that's going to be a room with children or one that impacts children. And if they can't make the decision necessary to keep children safe because they're not prepared, we've just left children in a room with someone who's not prepared to care for them. And so you see what I'm saying? Like, that's how I operate hardcore on that line, simply because the overwhelming feeling is like that of a child calling out to you. Because what you're hearing and what you're experiencing in that empathetic level is their inner child. It's their inner child.
And when you see from an empathetic perspective, you give someone so much more space without boundaries. Like, a lot of times boundaries do get crossed because you're focusing so much on that childhood, like that childlike quality, but then they are an adult and they do have an impact to make, devastating things happen in their lives and in your life. So boy, have I had to learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah, because it's the consent that happens before we get to the physical space, right? Because now I'm like non-consensually, I'm taking on the role of mother to an adult, and they didn't ask, but they're also asking me to do that by being this way. Like yeah, like I think everyone's 20s to their like 30s, that age range is having to deal with that with peers. So I think we all have a lot of experience being like, I had lots of empathy here and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this. So like, that's definitely a healthy, I feel like if you're having that conversation with yourself in your 20s, you're healthy. And if you've like had that conversation with yourself at any point in time and figured out a way forward, you're like definitely on a path of like selfness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. So I've hung out with like a lot of schizophrenics, and like what they taught me is that everything is connected, right? Like especially with paranoia and stuff, they'll see connections and things that I don't see. And I'm like, that's not happening. Like, that's not a real connection. But then when you hold that space and you really expand your mind, you really do see like everything is connected. There is infinite possibility. And obviously I'm not saying, oh, this is a healthy way to be. it's actually a super hardcore and intense way to be. But I feel like that expansiveness has really taught me a lot. And it sounds similar kind of to what you're saying too, of the surrender, letting the energy flow, holding space for the expanded reality. And I mean, for me, like I can kind of slip in and out of that dissociative, like selfless reality of like, oh, like I'm just like part of the whole and it's all just like happening and it had happened with or without me. And I'm like, and I can see things in a very psychedelic way. And then other
Mhm.
times I can like come completely in my body and just be like, I'm gonna make $1,000 today. How am I gonna do it? Or whatever, like getting really like hyper focused on a goal or like being really embodied in my own self. So I don't know, like I don't even really have a question, but like what are your thoughts on that? Like the web of connections and self and health and the mind.
Ooh, so this is always my favorite topic. This is why I love astrology, because astrology gives you a great way of okay, let me start here. The Stoics, okay, Stoic philosophy, which everybody talks about now, which is very much a red flag because people don't read. The Stoics, they were astrologists. Like they study astrology, they look at it in nature, and then they apply it to their personal life. This is what's going on in the world. What's the original energy, right? Like, is there a fire happening today, which is going to dictate a lot of different things, right? So, what's actually happening that's totally outside of my control? That's the stars. You'll never be able to control that. Humans can control the weather by indirectly being crazy, right? But they'll never be able to impact the stars. Never.
Right.
That is a force beyond human understanding. So the astrologists say, what is the force beyond us saying? Right. Okay. And so that'll be like the moon. We just had a new moon today, right?
Yep.
Um, it's like the new moon in Virgo. It's a deep rest period. You're not supposed to be like, if you go outside right now and try to do a bunch of stuff, you're probably going to exhaust yourself very quickly. Also, it just left Leo, right? Which means it was all fired up, wanting to be seen. Attention, attention, pay attention to me. And then it gets thrown straight into the hermit mode. That is really jarring. Going from Leo to Virgo season sometimes. It's really jarring like that. But that's what's happening outside in the world. I have no control over that. So then how do I bring this me? I'm one with this whole energy. I have no control over the flow. The flow just goes into the collective, which I do impact people. If the flow says I can just scream out and be my true self, and that's like running outside, butt naked and like, being free and stuff like that. Sure, that's what the source energy is saying. But when you come down to the collective, perhaps you don't have perhaps being butt naked free and running and claiming who you are before you run into solitude isn't exactly this extreme thing. And this is where we find the in any imbalances, nervous system imbalances, also emotional regulate. This is where people are emotionally dysregulated. And remember, emotion carries story and memory and all of that sort of stuff. So what scripts do people have going on in their mind of how they're reading this energy? Because for some people, it's strip down and run down the street. And for somebody else, that means I'm going to strip myself down and actually put down on this paper what I really feel. That's the same thing, same energy. But one person's outside butt naked and running down the street and we're all concerned. And the other person is saying what they really mean this time
Yeah.
to the person that they mean to say it to, right? So this is like, that's where it's like it's like, there's no shame or anything that, right? We never know what's really going on with people or what stories they're telling themselves or why. Like maybe this person does need to run butt naked out in the woods somewhere. You know what I mean? Like that there's places for that. But like, how can someone actually understand that message and then decide what's best to do for them? Is this an inner thing that I need to do? Or is this an expression that I need to send out? Or am I just feeling pressured by the collective right now to get stripped down and bare myself? Like, who wants me to do that? And then maybe you find out that it's somebody who really wants to be in your business. And this person keeps hitting you up and you're like, please stop, like maybe you're just trying to get your attention on what you don't like, what's being asked of you by the collective. That's all. Like when we sit with ourselves, I like to tell people to journal because the journal will talk back to you, but it's not going to talk back to you and convince you to do strange things. You know what I'm saying? And when you write all of the wild feelings and thoughts down on paper, they start to become real, as in realized. When you write, I just want to run outside, scream and yell X, Y, and Z and this, that, and the other, and you start to actually see, well, that's really not who I am. why do I feel like this then? And then you really start to get into it. And then this is what you like kind of cultivate in yourself, this like inner knowingness. You organize all your characters. I just say that people who are schizophrenic, they're disorganized. That's it. They have all these characters inside of them, just like everybody else does, that are screaming at them because for whatever reason, they are repressed and they're not being expressed properly.
Yeah.
They're being fired off instead, reactive. And that leads you to burnout. That leads you to all sorts of calamity at a point in time. And like, we all have that in different ways, you know what I mean? So it's like, that's why I always say there's no morality to any of that. It's just organization. That's the Saturn in me talking. It's just organization.
I love that. Yeah, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, probably more so just like CPTSD and autism, but like I like, your direction of non-diagnosis, but I have found it really helpful to communicate with other people about my internal state and the patterns that I have and explaining them. But the extreme emotions of either autistic burnout or autistic meltdowns and or BPD, whatever you want to call it, the extreme emotions I faced, nothing touched them. I was heavily medicated, put through therapy for, 10, 20 years. Nothing touched these emotions except that internal organization of listening to the different parts, holding space for them, integrating them, and having that expanded view because it was so much repression. So we're totally speaking the same language. I used internal family systems and then like followed practitioners who studied under Teal Swan. But what other tools do you recommend to people who are struggling with that kind of disorganized internal state?
Okay, so it's a deep, deep question because essentially the act of not having an internalized inner world is lack of spirituality and community. So anyone who is in the Western world under any colonial construct and does not have like a hyphen culture that they practice at home and in community outside of their home with. So for instance, I'm Black American, but I'm also Black American Caribbean. And so a lot of my family practices, like a lot of my family members are spiritual. So there's a lot of spiritual passed down information, stories, and how stories are taught, how we process information, or I should say, how you process your emotions is taught as social etiquette. And oftentimes people confuse social etiquette, which is an act of that's a spirituality, like with all the indigenous myths and stuff like that, mythos and stories, it's all social etiquette. It's all social etiquette. When we don't have anything outside of American capitalism or like if you're looking at yourself and you're looking at this is for everybody listening at home, you are looking at your life and you say, I don't know what my spiritual practice is. That is not the end of the world. It just means that you are the creator of it. And so a lot of people are at a place where they don't have one that they've inherited, right? So they're working from scratch, or they have something that they've inherited and there's some bugs in that system. You know what I mean? Either way, everybody, whether you've inherited something or not, you are the creator of your own spiritual practice. And that means you get to decide all throughout the entire way what you call it, how you name it, how it moves through you. And you are also a child of the world, which means the more cultures you learn and actually integrate and understand for your internal practice, the better. So for instance, and I'll explain what I mean by that, because I know that there's probably a lot of confusion of like, well, cultural appropriation. You just can't go to somebody's culture and borrow their stories and their way of living. No, you can't. What you can do though is this is why I'm always like, it comes down to media literacy. We have to start reading. We read. I tell my students this all the time. If you want to unpack any epigenetic trauma that you have, read from your generation stories widely of all the cultures that you come in contact with. Read that. Do that for your mother. Do that for your grandmother. The reason why I say it passes through the mother line is because you were an egg in your mother who was an egg in her mother while she was dealing with vibrational frequency, vibrations, the language of people around her and those that she impacted and impacted her. So that could be neighboring countries, that could be systems of thought, whatever it is. You just try to find that. You read in those generations, you read to understand the culture of their day-to-day life and the collective impact, how the collective impacted them. And so that can heal just about as much epigenetic issues that you have, because you'll start to organize the emotional what's dysregulated, and what's caused by what the disorganization is of all these characters. Is these are all characters and you don't know the roles that they play. You don't have scripts. You don't know who they are. You've got a thief inside of you who really isn't a thief at all. Someone just labeled him that, and he's just a mercurial like adventurer. Okay, but he's been labeled a thief because somebody has like personal issues. And so now this energy that comes up that makes you feel like you are like just taking things all the time, and now you got to over police yourself or just let it go or whatever. No, this is just a voice that has not been identified. Honestly, when you read fiction, and I'm saying read fiction, read enough history to understand the culture of the fiction that you're reading. But sometimes, I mean, I tell people all the time, there's a British man in here somewhere, you know? And he's always bothering me. But the more that I read, like literally from the region, the more his voice comes through, the more I understand his culture. And I'm like, there's a guy in here, and I just he didn't have a role. I'm a Black woman and living in America. He had no role to
He was lost and confused. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, yeah, he's lost and confused. And he's also trying really hard not to like do a microaggression against me. Cause like I'm very not okay with anti-Blackness. You know what I mean? So like, you know, any kind of feeling that came up that felt like it was putting me in the position to be like anti-Black with myself, I'd over police, not understanding that like I'm picking up on some old indigenous, like European ancestor somewhere who's like, I don't know what any of that is. I'm just trying to tell you this. So like reading, honestly, and like, you know, people will say as they're entering their spiritual journey, I think I was Cleopatra in another life. Really? Try reading her diary. You'll find out you probably weren't, but you do have a lot of ties to people who were alive in the general space or place, probably Romans. There's a lot of them. So, you know, read stuff from actual Roman poets and Roman like novelists at the time. And then you start to understand and unpack so much, because you now can organize the voice that's trying to talk to you. It's not trying to sabotage you. It's not trying to cause you any harm. It's actually trying to deliver you a lesson that they learned. You know, one of my favorite ones, I talk about him all the time. I never even know his name. Epiphilus. Anyways, he's the one who wrote the Metamorphosis. And you know, one of the Greek myths from Psyche and Eros come from his story. It's called the Golden Ass. Yeah, the Golden Ass. Anyways, I picked up that book, and it was you know how we talked about when you first start reading, you don't really understand what's going on until quite some time because you've dived into their psyche. I'm telling you, from page 1, the first sentence, his psyche pulled me all the way in, and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I almost felt like, was this me in another life?
That's so real. That's so real.
Yeah.
I love
And
that.
man, and like just reading that unpacked so much for me, like just energetically, I changed as a person, because now I understood this is what drew me into mythology and all of that kind of stuff. I started to really understand that all these stories are talking to me, and people who wrote these stories were talking to me the same way same way we're talking to people right now who we will never see.
It's so powerful. It really is. I have I'm a starseed, so my consciousness is so like fixated on being tied to space, you know, and I am in this physical body and I have spent the time, but it's so hard to like be connected to my family of origin and be like, this is like really what I came from, because I've just diverged so much from that energy. Because I mean, I was born, my parents met while working as janitors at a nuclear bomb factory. So my genetics got like warped or whatever into whoever I am. So I definitely like springboarded off of whatever my family system is. But I love what you're saying. And I had another friend who just sat me down and like was like, you need to study your ancestors. Like you cannot just be like, I'm a starseed and like frolic away from the reality of the epigenetic reality. So this is like such a beautiful and easy introduction to that, because especially like as a starseed, as a white person, it's like, I want to distance myself from anything that happened in my direct family or there. And like my family never kept records. So I actually don't know anything. Like my family came and emigrated here. My grandparents emigrated here on one side and then my great grandparents on another side. So thankfully I, you know, don't have those direct ties to American slavery, but who knows what else, like the world is full of insane things all around. So I'm definitely going to look into the history of what my family was probably up to, because I think it's very important for us all to do that.
I'll say this, as a star seed, ask yourself, which star systems are you drawn towards, and what language is the name in of that star system? If you're like star system XX365, because that's what NASA has labeled it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then like, yeah, it's going to be difficult. But if you're like, no, it's definitely the Orion belt. Well, Orion's Greek. Go start there. Start with the mythos, because like the stories are about, like, I want to, like, it's such a beautiful thing. Astrology, everyone was an astrologist. Every culture was an astrologist. We all belong to the stars. All of our stories come from navigating the stars. We're all star seeds. But start with the language you speak and whatever you're drawn to. If you start noticing Greek mythos coming up a lot, go discover. It doesn't mean you don't need to be directly related to the Greek line for you to have been impacted by Greek culture. Like, all of Europe is heavily impacted by Roman culture specifically, because if you were ever from any place that was ever Roman Catholic under any particular time period, and your literary system came after England, your literary system came after Germany, came after Russians' literary systems, right? Like, those were all dictated by the Roman Catholics, which means they were all dictated by Rome, which means they were all dictated by the Greeks. They're like, scholarship is just teaching history, teaching stories.
Mhm.
So for forever, a lot of Europeans were only taught Roman history, Roman understanding. That's the only way that they know. And the way that you move beyond that is to go into it first. Go into it first, because the Romans will tell you exactly. They'll tell you everything about the people that they went around bullying. The one thing a victor can never do is stop telling you about the loser. You know?
Yeah.
So like, they'll tell you everything. You'll hear a name and you'll just be like, huh, that's weird. I saw a book with that title. And it was some silly fiction book, and you start reading, and then all of a sudden new names come up. And yeah, our ancestors are screaming at us all the time, because I think what they're ultimately saying is like, oh my God, you morons, you're all the same. Get it together. This is embarrassing. Stop. Why do you guys not understand that all the stories lead to one? Oh my God. That's what they're really
Yeah.
yelling at us this whole time. And so all you have to do, just start with English, go through English, go through classical English if you want to, then like, just, based on whatever interested you. You don't like, and never pick up a book that you're not interested in. Pick up one that either makes you irritated or one that makes you really curious. When you
I love
do that
that.
one, yeah, only read that way. I DNF stuff all the time, but but the majority of my books are just suspended at like chapter 5, chapter 16. I will take a year to read the last chapter of a book if that's how long it takes my attention to come back to it. Now, that being said, I don't talk and discuss things that are open, because, if you haven't read the whole thing, there's no point in talking about it.
That's very honorable of you. Sometimes I will say I read an article and really all I did was read the clickbait.
Yeah.
You
It's
gotta
really
be
like,
careful.
and my partner, he said this, and I think that was better. We put on a performance for others, but we do it for ourselves, because like, you never want to leave yourself hanging. You know what I mean? Or set yourself
Yeah.
up like in any, because I'm in the book space and I talk about books and stuff like that. I just never want to leave myself hanging, be like, oh, I know what I read this, and I didn't read it. Cause I've come after people who've done that, and I've seen the damage.
So
I've
funny.
seen it, so
Yeah.
yeah, like, just read what brings you that joy, what sparks you that way, and it'll lead you. They're talking to you all the time.
When you asked what language the star system was in, I got this like immediate flash of like, it was more so like what language the beings that I'm from speak in. It just, as like an instant thing. And it was like harmony and music. And I was like, whoa. So I was thinking through that lens also of what you were saying, like
Yeah.
study music. And music is also something that connects us all.
Mhm.
I play the harp, and whenever I'm hanging out with other people and they like are looking at it, I'm like, play it. Like, probably you had an ancestor who played the harp or the lute or something very, very similar to this instrument. This is like part of all of our ancestry. Like, we string like a few strings on an instrument, and like being able to just play around with that and pluck that is it's important, I think.
The whole universe speaks in music. We're talking in music right now. We just don't find it as like pleasurable as lyrical music. You know, like this conversation, it doesn't sound like a symphony, but it does. It is an orchestration, and it plays music
I
to
love
somebody's ears. Mhm.
Yeah. There's a Unarius Foundation. They're like a school in Southern California that teaches some stuff that we both like. And they said that, how we're supposed to be talking is in song. And I really like that idea, like just the idea that every single thing that we are saying is song. It's just sort of muted. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. It was such an honor to be able to hear your thoughts and get a little glimpse into your mind and the expansive nature that you hold. How can we follow you online? How can people follow you and follow your newsletter?
Okay, so Patreon, the free newsletter is on Patreon, just Midnight Scholar Society and Patreon, and it's right there. I do recommend that people join via a browser or something like that, and if you have an iPhone, because iPhones and iPhones and all apps are weird. They're starting to charge people things, like charge a tax for being on platforms. So anyways, but Patreon, you can easily find me there, and also TikTok. That's usually where I'm at. Sometimes I'm on YouTube when I do some long form stuff, but if you really want to be a part of the conversation, just the Patreon. It's
just Midnight Scholar Society. Midnight Scholar Society on everything.
Yeah, come join the society.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Unicole Unicron Friends unite. Business, frequency, alien.